My husband insulted me in front of an entire military hall. Not in private. Not during an argument. In the middle of his promotion dinner, while officers, guests, his mother, and a retired general watched him raise a glass like he was the most honorable man in the room. Mark stood under the warm lights in his dress uniform, smiling like the night belonged only to him. And maybe, for a few minutes, it did. Everyone clapped when his name was announced. People stood to shake his hand. His mother wiped fake tears from her eyes. His old teammates slapped him on the back and called him a man who had earned every inch of that room. I stood beside him. Not as his wife. Not really. More like decoration. It hadn't always been that way. There was a time when he looked at me very differently. Somewhere along the way, something changed. To this day, I'm still not sure whether it was ambition or fear. He thanked his commanders. He thanked his friends. He thanked his mother for believing in him when no one else did. Then he looked at me, and the room got quiet in that strange way people get quiet when they sense something cruel is coming. Mark smiled. My wife Sarah has always been good at standing quietly in the background, he said. Some people serve by doing great things. Others just stay out of the way. A few people laughed. Not loudly. Carefully. The way people laugh when they know something is wrong but do not want to be the first one to stop it. His mother smiled like she had been waiting years to hear him say it out loud. I felt every face turn toward me. I did not speak. I did not cry. I did not defend myself. Mark kept going. She was never the ambitious one, he said. Never the one people noticed. But I suppose every success story needs someone ordinary standing nearby. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me where you are watching from. Your city or state. Because sometimes, when you are standing alone in a room full of people, it helps to remember someone out there understands what that feels like. That was when my fingers brushed against something inside my jacket. I almost forgot it was even there. It wasn't valuable. At least, not to anyone who didn't know what they were looking at. Across the room, I caught a young soldier looking at me for only a second. Then she quickly looked away. I told myself I was imagining it. But a few moments later, someone else noticed the same thing. He had been sitting at the head table, silent and unreadable all night. But the moment his eyes landed on that small mark near my collar, his face changed. Mark did not see it at first. He was too busy enjoying the sound of the room turning against me. Then he leaned into the microphone and said the word that finally stopped my breathing. Useless. The room laughed again. A little louder this time. Someone even raised a glass toward Mark. My mother-in-law nodded proudly. Mark looked around the room, almost relieved, as if everyone had finally agreed with him. I lowered my eyes. I remember thinking, just let it end. That's when the sound broke the room. A chair scraping across the polished floor. Because General Hale stood up. His chair scraped against the floor. Every officer in the room turned toward him. Mark froze with the microphone still in his hand. The general was not looking at him. He was looking at me. Then he asked one quiet question. Where did you get the night watch, Mark? The room went completely silent. No one answered. Not even me. Because the way General Hale asked that question made it sound less like curiosity and more like recognition. For the first time that night, my husband stopped smiling. And for the first time that night, my husband looked afraid. But to understand why that one question destroyed everything Mark thought he knew about me, I need to take you back to where this story really began. Before that dinner, I used to tell myself Mark did not mean to erase me. It happened slowly. At first, it was just small things. A promotion photo where he stood in the center and I was cropped halfway out. A dinner with his unit where he introduced me as my wife and nothing more. A conversation where someone asked what I had done in the army and Mark answered before I could. She worked intelligence, he said once, with a little shrug. Mostly paperwork. I remember smiling because that was easier than correcting him. Paperwork. That was the word he liked. Safe. Small. Forgettable. He never asked why I did not talk much about my service. He never asked why certain dates still made me quiet. He never asked why I kept one old pin tucked in a small box at the back of my drawer. He only saw the silence. And over time, he decided silence meant there was nothing there. I had been trained to keep things inside. Not because I was cold. Not because I was weak. Because some parts of service do not belong at dinner tables. Some names do not get repeated. Some nights stay sealed, even after you come home. That was something Mark never understood. To him, if a story could not be told out loud, it had no value. But there were things in my past that I could not use to win an argument. There were things I could not throw in his face when he made me feel small. Every time he laughed at how ordinary I was, I had to swallow words I was still not allowed to say. And maybe that was the hardest part. Not being underestimated. Knowing I could end the conversation and choosing not to. His mother made it worse. Elaine had always looked at Mark like he was a man destined for greatness. When he entered a room, she straightened. When he spoke, she listened like every word mattered. But when I spoke, her eyes drifted away, as if she had already decided I had nothing useful to add. One Sunday afternoon, she sat at our kitchen table while Mark showed her photos from a ceremony. "My son looks like a commander," she said, touching the picture with 2 fingers. "People notice men like that." Mark laughed. "Mom." "No, it's true," she said. Then her eyes moved to me. "Some people are born to stand in front. Others are more comfortable behind them." I waited for Mark to say something. Anything. He did not. He just looked down at his coffee and smiled like the comment was harmless. That smile told me more than an argument ever could. A week before the promotion dinner, I heard them talking in the hallway. They did not know I was close enough to hear. "She'll be fine," Mark said. "Sarah never makes a scene." Elaine lowered her voice. "Just don't let her make the night awkward." "She won't," he said. "She never really did anything people would understand anyway." I stood still. My hand was on the laundry basket. For a moment, I could not move. He had not said it with anger. That was what hurt most. He said it like a fact. Like after all those years beside me, that was the truth he had settled on. I walked back to the bedroom without making a sound. That night, I opened the little box in my drawer and looked at the old pin. I almost left it there. Then I closed my fingers around it. Not to prove anything. Not to challenge him. Just to remind myself that I was still someone before Mark decided I was no one. Mark came home carrying an invitation with the kind of smile that always meant he was thinking about himself first. He placed it on the kitchen counter without looking at me. "Promotion dinner. Next Friday." His voice carried more pride than warmth. Then he added, "There will be generals, senior officers, and people who actually matter." He watched my reaction before saying, "General Thomas Hale is supposed to attend too." The name settled quietly in the room, but I gave nothing away. I simply nodded and folded the invitation again. He seemed almost disappointed that I didn't ask questions. I had already learned that every conversation about his career somehow ended with me being reminded where I belonged. The following evening, he rehearsed his speech in front of the mirror while I cleared the dinner dishes. Every sentence celebrated his hard work, his leadership, his future. There was never an R. There was only I. When he finally turned toward me, his expression became serious. "One more thing," he said. "Don't make this night about you." I looked at him without answering. "Just smile. Stay beside me. Let me handle the talking." His words landed harder than he realized. I wasn't trying to steal anything from him. I had spent years making sure I never did. Yet somehow my silence had become another problem he wanted to control. "I know how to behave," I answered quietly. "I hope so," he replied. "Some people there won't understand your situation." He walked away before I could ask what he meant. I wasn't sure whether he believed I had nothing worth saying, or whether he simply wanted everyone else to believe it too. After he left the room, I stood alone for a long time. His warning echoed in my head. The dinner no longer felt like a celebration. It felt like a stage where my only role was to disappear. Later that night, I opened the small wooden box I kept hidden in the back of my closet. Inside rested an old pin that hadn't seen daylight in years. Its edges were worn smooth by time. To anyone else, it probably looked ordinary. To me, it carried memories I could never explain. I picked it up carefully and let it rest in my palm. There were easier ways to defend myself. There were stories that could silence every insult Mark had ever spoken. But they weren't mine to tell. Some promises lasted far longer than a marriage. I hesitated before fastening the pin inside my jacket where almost no one would notice it. It wasn't meant to impress anyone. It reminded me who I had been before the world started measuring me through someone else's success. Taking one slow breath, I closed the box and returned it to the shelf. Whatever happened at that dinner, I would walk in as myself. Nothing more. The night of the celebration arrived faster than I expected. As we drove toward the military hall, Mark spent the entire trip talking about seating arrangements, speeches, and important guests. He never once asked if I was nervous. He only reminded me not to interrupt conversations with senior officers. When we entered the ballroom, bright lights reflected from polished metals and pressed uniforms. Conversations filled every corner. My mother-in-law looked me over from head to toe before forcing a thin smile. "That's what you're wearing?" she asked. "It's appropriate," I replied. She shrugged. "Just don't distract from Mark tonight." Before I could answer, Mark spotted several officers across the room. His face lit up instantly. "Stay here," he said. "I'll be back." He didn't wait for my response. He crossed the room with confidence, laughing as he reached out to shake hands. Within seconds, I was standing alone while he became the center of another circle that had no place for me. I rested one hand lightly against the hidden pin beneath my jacket and watched him disappear into the crowd. For reasons I couldn't explain, hearing the name General Hale earlier kept returning to my thoughts. I pushed it aside, straightened my shoulders, and quietly followed the path that would lead me into the longest night of my life. The ballroom looked even larger once I was standing inside it alone. Mark had disappeared into a circle of officers near the center of the room. Every few seconds, someone reached for his hand or touched his shoulder. He laughed easily. He stood taller there, surrounded by men who saw him the way he wanted to be seen. I was seated near the wall. Not at the front table. Not beside him. A name card with my full name sat at the edge of a smaller table, half hidden behind a flower arrangement. I looked at it for a moment and almost laughed. Even the card seemed unsure whether I belonged there. Across the room, Mark glanced at me once. Then he turned back to his friends. His mother took the seat closer to the center and never looked back. I watched her lean toward another woman and whisper something. The woman looked in my direction, then quickly looked away. I told myself to breathe. I told myself this was only one night. Then Mark stepped toward the microphone. The applause started before he even spoke. He smiled, waited for it to settle, and began thanking everyone who had helped him get there. His commanders, his mentors, his mother, his old teammates. Every name came easily. Mine did not come at all. Then he said, "And of course, every officer needs support at home." That was when several faces turned toward me. I felt it before I saw it. The shift. The room waiting to see how he would define me. Mark gave a little smile, the kind he used when he wanted an insult to sound harmless. "Sarah has always been good at keeping things simple," he said. "She never chased rank. Never chased recognition. Some people just aren't built for that kind of pressure." A few men laughed. Not because it was funny. Because Mark had given them permission. I kept my hands folded in my lap. I did not look down. I did not give him the satisfaction of seeing me shrink. He took that silence as permission too. "I used to joke that she had the easiest job in the military," he continued. "Quiet rooms. Files. Probably more coffee than combat." This time the laughter spread farther. Something cold moved through my chest. He knew enough to make it sound believable. Not enough to know what he was touching. His mother smiled from her table. She looked proud. Not embarrassed. Proud. Like every word confirmed what she had always believed about me. Someone near the front muttered, "Lucky kind of service." Another voice answered, "Wish I had that posting." The laughter came again, softer but wider. I felt my fingers move before I meant them to. They brushed the inside of my jacket, where the old pin rested against the fabric. For 1 second, it grounded me. Then I noticed her. A young female soldier at a side table had stopped laughing. She was looking at my jacket. Not at my face. At the place where the pin had shifted just enough to catch the light. Her expression changed so quickly that I almost thought I imagined it. Confusion first. Then recognition. Then something close to respect. She sat straighter. Her eyes moved from me to the head table. To General Thomas Hale. He had been quiet all night, watching more than speaking. Now his gaze had found the same small mark. His hand froze beside his water glass. Mark did not see any of it. He was enjoying himself too much. He leaned closer to the microphone. "But hey," he said, "not everyone can be useful in the same way." The room made that uncomfortable sound again. Half laugh. Half warning. I should have stood up. I should have left. Instead, I stayed still, because leaving would have made him right in their eyes. It would have become another story about Sarah being awkward. Sarah being emotional. Sarah not knowing how to stand in a room full of important people. Then Mark looked directly at me. And he went one step too far. "Some people are leaders," he said. "And some people are just useless." The word hit the room harder than he expected. Even the people who had laughed before went quiet for half a breath. Then one man chuckled, and a few others followed, because silence would have made them guilty. I heard the first wave of laughter. Then the scrape of a chair. Sharp. Loud. Final. General Hale stood up. The laughter died so fast it felt like someone had cut the power. Mark froze with his mouth still near the microphone. The general was not looking at him. He was looking at me. And for the first time that night, the entire room turned with him. General Hale stood in the silence like he had not heard the laughter at all. For a moment, no one moved. Mark still held the microphone near his mouth, but his smile had cracked. The young soldier at the side table sat perfectly still. Even my mother-in-law stopped pretending to understand what was happening. Hale's eyes never left my jacket. Then he spoke, calm and low. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said, "where did you get that mark?" The room shifted again. Not loudly. Not all at once. But I felt it. The attention that had been used to shame me was now turning into something else. I did not answer right away. Because the truth was not simple. And it was not mine to offer in a ballroom. Mark forced a laugh into the microphone. It sounded thin. "General, I'm sure it's just one of Sarah's old keepsakes," he said. "She likes holding on to little things from the past." Hale did not look at him. That was the first time I saw fear move across Mark's face. Not guilt. Not regret. Fear. He was used to people laughing when he made me smaller. He was not used to someone more powerful than him refusing to follow along. "Captain Mitchell," Hale said, his voice still even, "I was not asking you." The microphone lowered slightly in Mark's hand. A few officers glanced at each other. One of them stopped smiling completely. I kept my fingers away from the pin, even though every part of me wanted to cover it. Hale took one careful step forward. "That mark is not decoration," he said. "And it is not issued by accident." A chill moved through the room. The young female soldier looked down at her plate, then back at me. Her eyes were different now. Not curious. Certain. Like she had heard a story once and was suddenly wondering if the woman in front of her belonged inside it. Mark swallowed. "Sir, with respect, I think there's a misunderstanding." "No," Hale said. "There may be a classified record. That is very different." The word classified landed harder than any insult Mark had thrown at me. His mother's face changed first. Her proud smile vanished. She looked from Hale to me, then to Mark, as if someone had moved the floor under her chair. I stood still. I did not explain. I did not confirm. That was the one thing Mark had never understood. Silence did not always mean emptiness. Sometimes it meant discipline. Sometimes it meant a promise had survived longer than anyone expected. Hale turned toward one of the senior officers near the front table. "I need this verified through proper channels," he said. "No public assumptions. No speeches. Just the record." The officer nodded once, already serious. Mark looked at me then. Really looked. Not like a husband. Not like a man who loved me. Like a man trying to calculate how much he did not know. For a second, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. If stories about quiet strength, family, and justice mean something to you, I'd be honored if you subscribed before we continue. Because the most important part of this story is still ahead. Hale's gaze returned to me, softer now but still careful. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said, "until this is verified, you do not have to say a word." I gave the smallest nod. That was all I could give. Across the room, Mark stood frozen beneath the same lights that had made him look untouchable minutes earlier. But now those lights felt different. They were not shining on his promotion anymore. They were exposing the first crack in everything he had built. The room waited while the senior officer stepped aside with his phone. No one spoke above a whisper. General Hale remained standing, one hand resting on the back of his chair. His face did not show anger. That made it worse for Mark. Anger could be argued with. Calm authority could not. I could feel people looking at me differently now. Not kindly yet. Not fully. But differently. A few minutes earlier, I had been the wife at the side table. The quiet woman everyone had permission to laugh at. Now I was the woman connected to something no one in that room understood. Mark shifted beside the microphone. "Sir, I'm sure this can be cleared up privately," he said. Hale did not answer him. The senior officer returned with a look I will never forget. He held the phone close to his chest and lowered his voice, but the room was so silent that every word carried. "There is a record," he said. "Night watch file confirmed. Restricted access. Name attached." He looked at me then. Not at Mark. At me. And in that one look, the room changed again. My husband's face lost color. I kept my hands still. I had spent years learning how to stand inside silence. But this silence was different. This one was no longer being used against me. Hale nodded once, as if a piece had fallen into place. "That is all I needed to know for now," he said. But of course, it was not all the room wanted to know. You could feel it. The questions pressing against every wall. What file? What name? Why had a retired general recognized a mark on my jacket when my own husband had not recognized anything about me? The senior officer looked back at the phone, then toward Hale. "There is a brief authorization note attached," he said. "It references an intelligence warning issued during a night movement." My throat tightened. I did not look at Mark. I could not. Because suddenly I was no longer in that ballroom. I was back in the dark. Back in a room lit by screens and red light. Back with a headset pressed against one ear, listening to broken signals that did not sound right. No one in that ballroom knew what it felt like to hear danger before anyone else could see it. The note did not tell the whole story. It could not. But it said enough. The senior officer read carefully. "Warning intercepted before medical convoy entered hostile route. Movement delayed. Ambush confirmed after reroute." A small sound moved through the room. Not laughter. Not even surprise. Something closer to shame. Mark stared at the officer like the words were being spoken in another language. I could almost hear his thoughts. Medical convoy. Ambush. Warning. Sarah. They did not fit together in the version of me he had created. Hale turned slightly, keeping the focus on the record, not on himself. "That warning saved lives," he said. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The young female soldier at the side table lowered her eyes, then looked at me again with something that made my chest ache. Respect is quiet when it first enters a room. But once it does, everyone feels the difference. The senior officer continued, each word removing another piece of the lie Mark had built. Convoy included medical personnel and wounded service members awaiting transfer. Casualties avoided due to early intelligence action. That was when several people stopped looking at me altogether. They looked down. At their plates. At their hands. At the floor. People who had laughed 5 minutes earlier suddenly found silence very useful. Mark tried to speak. I didn't know. No one turned toward him. That might have been the hardest punishment for a man like Mark. Not being yelled at. Not being accused. Just not being the center anymore. His mother sat frozen, her proud face gone pale and empty. The same woman who had smiled when he insulted me now looked like she wanted the floor to open beneath her chair. Hale finally looked at Mark. "Captain Mitchell," he said, "you called your wife useless in a room full of officers." Mark opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The senior officer's expression hardened. "This conversation will continue later," he said. "Not here." 5 simple words. But Mark understood them. So did everyone else. His promotion dinner had become something else entirely. Not a celebration. Not a speech. Not the perfect night he had planned. It had become the moment his own words turned against him. He looked at me then, searching for something. Forgiveness. Explanation. Maybe rescue. But for the first time in years, I gave him nothing to use. I stood quietly beneath the lights he had wanted for himself, while the room finally saw the woman he had tried so hard to erase. The silence after the record felt heavier than the laughter ever had. No one applauded. No one rushed to comfort me. And, somehow, I was grateful for that. I did not want applause. I did not want a public apology. I did not want Mark's mother to suddenly pretend she had always respected me. I only wanted to breathe without being made small. I turned away from Mark before he could use my face to save himself. "Sarah," he said, stepping after me. "Wait." I didn't know. I stopped, but I did not turn around. "That was the problem," I said quietly. He had no answer. Not one that mattered. Outside the ballroom doors, the noise faded behind me. For the first time all night, my hands were steady. The old pin rested against my jacket, no longer a secret weapon, no longer a burden. Just a piece of truth I had carried longer than anyone knew. In the days that followed, Mark tried to explain. Then he tried to apologize. Then he tried to ask if we could move past it. But some words do not end when the room goes quiet. Some words show you where you have been standing for years. I left that marriage without shouting. I did not ruin his career. I did not chase revenge. The truth had already done what it needed to do. And I finally chose peace. If you have ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your dignity, I would love to hear your thoughts. Share your story in the comments. I read every one. Because quiet people still have stories. And sometimes, the strongest thing they ever do is walk away.